Hello, and welcome to the first SOP podcast for 2024, brought to you by thescienceofpsychotherapy.net and presented by me, Richard Hill. For those of you who've been looking at and watching our podcast for a while, this might all sound a little bit solo at the moment. That's because my great friend Matt Darlitz from the Science of Psychotherapy, he wants to spend more time focusing on the technical stuff in the background, and he actually wants me to present. Well, I'm not short of a chat, and so it suits us both down to the ground because I just love doing the SOP podcasts where we get to really explore what it is to be human, this complex, fascinating thing that we are. And we look at what people are thinking, what are they doing? What's innovative? What's new? What's developing? And where are the insights coming that are opening the doors of possibility? Because that's the great goal. That's the goal of science, to find out what we don't yet know. And in psychotherapy, we're trying to find out what is helpful to others to improve their mind, their body, and really the soul as well. So today we start with a fabulous guest. Merle Yost comes to us from Colorado in the USA, and fascinating guy. Been working as a psychotherapist for over 25 years, but he's decided to put that aside a little bit and focus on some of this breakthrough workshop, which has now become online. It's the 7 Steps to Powerful Boundaries. He's got a number of publications which have all come to fruit in this wonderful workshop, and he'll talk about all those and explain that great story. So let's go over to Colorado in the USA and talk with Merle Yost. Hello and welcome, Merle Yost, to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's terrific. There's so much material. I've mentioned a few things just before you came on, before we come on here. But your life has been so interesting. Your work is so interesting, and you're at a position now where, well, can you just tell me a little bit about a quick potted history of the last 10 or 15 years, the sort of things you've been working on, and where you've got yourself to now with the work you're presenting and the work you're dealing with.
All right. Delighted to. Thank you. Oh, for the last 15 years or so, I was to this point of ending my psychotherapy practice. I did it for many, many, many years in private practice. And it became clear that I was really done doing that on a daily basis, that in some ways it was too small. I mean, I love doing the work and I still do intensives on occasion. People come to me for 5 consecutive days for 10 consecutive hours. And we do a lot of really deep, fast work. There's a whole lot of homework that goes into making that happen first. But I really discovered that what I wanted to do next was teach. And so I developed workshops and I wrote my 6th book, actually 5th and 6th book, and put those out there. And eventually I started doing workshops in person, and then COVID hit, of course, and destroyed everything. And the world changed and is never going back. So now it's all online. And so I spent the last couple of years writing the 7 Steps to Powerful Boundaries, recording it several times and rewriting it several times and bringing it to the world. And it's now out there and available. Now I'm creating space to write my 7th book. So I'm having a good time.
Fantastic. So let's go there. These wonderful 7 steps to powerful boundaries. Now that's a new video program. You've been doing this in workshop, but as you say, even there, with clients it's small, with workshops it's small. Now it's got this broader reach. So that's what we want to let's look upon that as the first thing that we're talking about to make people aware of. Now this program, the 7 steps to powerful boundaries. Boundaries. What are we talking about here? Now, we've all got lots of ideas, and I've had a little look at your stuff, and you've got a lovely, a really interesting, and I think invigorating perspective on this whole process and this whole subject.
Well, great. Yeah, because boundaries, the problem with boundaries is everybody blames everybody else for their bad boundaries. And they're not taking responsibility for their own selves and their own lives. And we also misunderstand it. We are taught our boundaries in childhood. I call it the dance of intimacy, how we interact with men. Our father teaches us how we interact with women. Our mother teaches, and we take that out to the world. We think that's just how the world works because our parents are gods and they obviously know everything.
Yeah, yes, that gets run out pretty quickly. I'm a grandfather now. Oh my gosh.
And then we go to work and we turn our bosses into our parents because we're trying to work out the stuff we didn't be able to work with our parents. And we marry our spouses in one form or marry our parents in one form or another and trying to work that out with them instead of going in and doing the work on ourselves and cleaning that up and making this easier. And so we all make it about the other person, what they're doing and what they're not doing. But where I come from, my training in Gestalt and Buddhism and a few other rather interesting things is it's about energetic boundaries that we're made up of energy. We're all just atoms. So everybody's just this big ball of energy. And once you really understand that energy and how it works and learn how to stay in your bubble of energy, is the word I would use, you then can control what comes in. And the truth is that you never want to merge. Merging is bad. The exception being a child under 18 months of age, the parent has to be merged with a child in order to track what the child needs. But from 18 months to 3 years of age, the parent withdraws because if they're there after 3 years of age, they're intruding upon the development of the self of the child. And the parent's job is to continually reflect back the child's external experience until they internalize that and develop a solid sense of self. And then they can be in the world without merging with everybody too, in order to do that. But we've made merging such a big part of the culture. Two shall be as one when you get married. And it's a great way to kill sex because because sex happens at the contact boundary. That's where the excitement happens. And if you're merged, there's no excitement happening. And then so you end up with all these sexless relationships and people don't understand. And all this silliness about feeling people's feelings and feeling their pain and all of this in order to have empathy and compassion. It's just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense because our real job is to validate that they're in pain, to be the witness of their experience so that they feel seen and acknowledged for their pain. They don't need you to get in there and mess with it for them. It's not useful to you. And you're absorbing all of their stuff. And then you have to figure out how you're going to get rid of it, which makes no sense at all.
Yeah, this is so interesting what you're saying because I mean we've always got to be cautious when we're listening to someone bringing a different point of view because swinging the pendulum. I mean, there's frameworks of engagement and interpersonal and integration of the frames, but it is very true that what there's been enormous amount of this of I need to feel your stuff. I need to actually be you, and and people also misunderstand sympathy for empathy, which is another. We won't open that can of worms just at the moment because there's more important stuff going on in the discussion. But this framework that I am a witness, I am, and I'm doing a lot of work, and I'm using the word responsive. I'm here to be responsive as I contribute myself. But if I'm trying to be you, or I'm trying to emulate you, then what does that leave me with? And this is interesting. Let's have a little look at this more on relationships, um,
Okay.
because I know that's one of the areas that's very strongly dealt with in here. But we'll have a look at the two aspects. One is the intimate, the close love relationship, partner relationship, but also then that relationship, that friend relationship, that deep companion there. What are your thoughts on the way those two things, whether there's the similarities and differences, and how you manage to teach them boundaries and how to work there?
Well, okay, first of all, boundary, literally the definition of boundary is where you stop and they start. I mean, it's that simple. It's no more complicated than that. That we've messed up that boundary through all the things we were just talking about. And so in terms of friends and in terms of a partner, I think it all comes down to vulnerability. and that we have different levels of vulnerability with these people. I mean, sometimes people have more vulnerability with their friends than they do their spouses, which is kind of sad. And vulnerability, so let me define vulnerability, because I think that's misunderstood as well. Vulnerability is the act of revealing a part of yourself that risks being rejected, shamed, humiliated. And so that's intimacy. And so the more intimacy you develop, the more trust you have, the more you can expose who you are. That doesn't mean merge with them. That just means being open to being actually seen for who and how you are. And so we do this with different degrees with different people. And hopefully, most of that's with your spouse, that they can hold that container or hold themselves in witness of you so that you feel seen, not that you need to be rescued per se.
Yeah, there was it reminds me of one of my favorite songs of Billy Joel's, and actually apparently one of his favorite songs too. It was a love song about a relationship that was doomed, pretty much. But it just had this lovely line in it. And he said, "You can have my heart to break." So it's sort of the pendulum swing the other side, but it was sort of saying, I am prepared. It is not a burden to me to risk the fact that this might not go. That I'm prepared to be vulnerable with you. And if it goes west, okay, it goes west. But if it goes north, wow.
Yeah, because your partner spouse should be the person who knows you most, who sees all of you, and that you've slowly exposed all of this to them, so you aren't dumping it all on them in one time and say,
Yes,
"Here,
not for the first date. Yeah,
you're going
that's
to
right.
drown all of my shit right now, and so let's see if you can swim or not." So it's something that happens over time as you deepen the trust and you expose yourself and you feel seen and validated and loved by this person in spite of whatever your shortcomings are, that hopefully you're working on at the same time and just not expecting them to deal with it forever and ever. So, and that's how you build trust. That's how you build intimacy, and you build that excitement at the contact boundary, because you're bouncing up against each other in a good way.
Yeah.
You can be seen. It was one of the things that ended my relation. I was in a 19-year relationship, and uh, we were in Paris. I was depressed because I'd understood we had a problem then when we were in London, and I understood what was going on, and he didn't. And and I said, I'm so depressed. And I said, and you don't seem to get it. He says, well, you expect me to be a therapist. And I said, no, I think after 18 years, you should be able to read my moods.
Yeah, this impasse of communion. And so now is that what's that in the relation to the boundaries where someone actually creates they create a boundary that stops that doesn't allow for the bouncing. So that's kind of what you're saying. Like
Yeah.
your partner had stopped bouncing, he'd sort of stopped earlier, saying, I don't want to go, and I'm leaving a gap. Am I seeing, is that a reasonable sort of interpretation?
And I would, in his particular case, it was just he was unwilling to do his own work.
Right.
So I'm getting more and more naked because I had done 20 some years of psychotherapy and all the other stuff that I was doing in all the trainings. And so I was just there and I was visible. And he was unwilling to do that. And ultimately, it killed the relationship because the gulf got so far between us that we couldn't cross it anymore. Because
That's interesting. If you have these gulfs, they will grow. Yeah, yeah. The gap between, and I think this is why. Well, we hear this in even more passive tales. I mean, that one had a particular element, but we talk where people say we've just grown apart.
right, it's their language, right? And they have, because they haven't stayed in contact. They haven't grown. You really, being in a relationship means growing together.
Yeah,
If you're going to have a long-term relationship, you both have to continue to deepen. You both have to get more and more naked with the other person, literally
yeah.
and figuratively. And if you don't, then you're literally going to stop growing, and the relationship will stop growing.
Hmm. Now you give us a beautiful sort of temptation to quantify this in a simple way, and I know it's not simple, but what you've done is you have actually clarified things down to sort of 7 steps in this. And I love the term. I'm beginning to understand with greater clarity what you mean by powerful boundaries. They're actually boundaries that allow you to bounce up more rather than
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
powerful, strong separations. Uh,
yeah.
so
It's
what can you give us a sort of a quick sort of précis of those 7 steps they have in the program?
Sure. The step one is because every boundaries all come back to what you learned in your family. So we take you back to your childhood and you get to go back and look at your childhood through a different lens. Who was and did your who was the did the parent love you? Did the parent abuse you and say they loved you?
Yes.
So if you spend your childhood getting humiliated, shamed, and beaten, that's what you think intimacy and love is. And so you go out into the world looking for that unconsciously. And so guess what? You're going to have terrible boundaries as a consequence. So you have to recognize that and heal that and do something about that. So we take you back through that. I do and I won't go into too much detail here, but it's an exploration of your childhood to look to see what that dance of intimacy you learned in your family was. And then step two is simply, it's the most academic of all of the steps, but it's a description of the 15 major boundaries and what they actually are. So that we can just talk about that. So it's a context that's holding the whole thing. Step three is an introduction to energetic boundaries, how I'm in this electric bubble and you're in this bubble, and how those bubbles can bounce up against each other, and how you can tune into anybody anywhere just by tuning into their bubble and knowing what's going on with them. I tell this story. I worked out with personal trainers a lot, and I walked into the gym one morning, and my personal trainer was standing there, and I said, "Hi, how are you?" He said, "Great." And I said, "No, you're not." And his response was, "Goddamn psychic psychotherapist." So
Yeah.
it was just obvious to me he was really bad shape, and it turned out to be true. So, but I didn't need to merge with him to know that. Simply when I made the initial tune, I could tell that was how I work with clients. I could sit there and track what was going on in their bodies by tracking what was going on in my body, not by merging with them, but by my bubble being in contact with their bubble. And I could tell what was going on. So when you learn the basics of this, it's really amazing.
So
And
that's
so,
like a sensitivity, isn't it? This Ernie
yeah,
Rossi and I would talk about that a lot.
yeah, there's a certain level of intuition, but it's mostly just learning how to truly track what your experience is. There's something called the Heart Math Institute that asserts that we carry in our heart chakra, we carry the complete map of everything that's going on inside of us. And so when I tune into that, I know everything that's going on inside of you.
Mm.
And you can know everything that's going on inside of me. So it's just amazing. And once you learn to trust that and practice that, it just opens up the world to you. And so my clients were like, "How did you know that? How did you know this was going on over here in me?" You told me.
Beautiful, beautiful. So where are we? Step 4.
Okay, step four is my most fun one. It's the most intense one. It's a clean no. It's a deep dive into shame and guilt and all the things that keep you from saying no cleanly, so that you aren't lost in that stuff and guilt and shame. And it's not fun, but it'll change you. And then step five is the advanced energetic boundaries, which you get the full picture of it. And then step six is really deepening into clairvoyance and intuition and these other skills to learn really how to utilize your body to tune into this stuff even more powerfully and effectively, and some other basic tools. And then step seven is just integration of all the parts of it into this big, glorious finale.
Yeah. I mean, integration is well, we talk about this a lot at Science of Psychotherapy, the nature of systems, and the nature of the complexity of systems. And it's important to differentiate the elements and explore them and expand them and give them greater depth and clarity. Then you put them all back together again. I make quite a lot of criticism where I talk about the trouble with therapeutic practices is that we differentiate an element like a cognitive thing or perhaps a somatic thing, and then we give it 3 letters, we put a fence around it, and then we charge $20 to use it. It's
That
rather than putting it back into the system.
Yes.
And so that's beautiful. And that uh, now with the new book, this is working with the program of the unspoken boundaries. And you've got this also, your most recent book is Facing the Truth of Your Life. Is
Yes.
that embracing those 7 steps? What are we expanding to in there? What else are we embracing in that book?
No, the book was actually written before I even started the first workshop.
Ah,
So I was writing it when I went to Australia.
yes, I haven't made a fuss about the fact that you've come to Australia, but I'm making a fuss now. A man who has traveled and wise now. So,
It's
writing that book, Facing the Truth in Your Life, it's such a powerful title.
Yeah, and it scares the shit out of most people, as it turns out. It was a little too confrontive, as it turns out. What it was is that I completed practice. I had sold my home in the San Francisco Bay Area. I went to Mexico for 3 months or something like that, and then I got on a cruise ship and went from San Diego to Auckland, New Zealand for 34 days. And that was my idea of heaven. But love writing on cruise ships. It's the best writer's work thing you can do, because all your needs are taken care of. All you can just write, and your bed is cleaned and made, and your food is all provided. You have entertainment. You can just write to your heart's content with no distractions. It's glorious.
Oh, we're brothers in this. I actually do. One of my books was written on a cruise ship, and I'm going to write my PhD in April.
Yes. So
So,
you understand.
absolutely understand. Yeah.
So what it was this distillation of what I had learned in almost 30 years of being a psychotherapist. And so I wanted to share some of that knowledge. And so I take on a lot of sacred cows. I piss off a lot of people in it. It's really intense. Uh, I challenge self love. I don't believe in it. I think it's a really bad concept. I challenge forgiveness. I think it's misused. I, uh, I take on the whole concept of what I call the victim identity disorder, and how that's such a dead end. It's a great way to end your life. And so I go after all this stuff, and it pisses off a lot of people, but there's a lot of people that tell me it's changed their lives. So
Yeah, I'm hearing quite a lot of reaction to a lot of these elements. I mean, I think it will settle down. I mean, first of all, we have to have the reaction, then we can have the response. We can come more into the frame. But I was just talking about it the other day, and exactly this subject of how we get too focused on being in the difficulty. But Stephen Porges describes this. He says we don't have a trauma problem. What we have is a system problem, an autonomic nervous system problem that has become where you get imbalances. But by constantly reframing yourself around the past history, then you're not doing anything about recovering and how to reset yourself.
but
Uh,
we don't reward it. We reward being a victim. It's become
yes,
the competition for being the biggest victim in the world is what it's all turned into at this point.
yes, you surely must have had something terrible must have. What is bothering you? And and this is this reflective of the fact that there is so much difficulty going on in the general culture that we're actually uh, one of the ways in which we explain it is we say, oh, but the world can't be terrible. It must be a little bit of me. That's perhaps I've just thrown that in and it's just a thought that come in on the top of my head. Um, we're trying to dissociate or disconnect or something, but what is stable in our lives is that I can be a victim. It's not a good
Yes,
stability.
it's how people get empathy. People feel sorry for them. They don't expect things of them. It's a get out of jail free card.
Right.
They don't have to cry anymore because they're a victim. And my answer to that is we've all been victimized. Nobody gets through this unscathed. Some worse than others. And I've certainly had my share of really ugly stuff. But I could have stayed there and been miserable and weighed 300 pounds and blamed everybody else for it. Or I could heal that and take back my power and stop giving it away. Because
Yeah.
that's what you when you're a victim. You're giving away your power to them. You've now changed my life. It's your responsibility. I'm doing nothing. so,
Yeah,
so
and of course, obviously, I know you're sort of saying, and there's a sliding scale of that, but
well,
everywhere
no matter
from
how
the
big, but no matter how big the victimization, and in the book I talk about small hurts and I talk about big hurts, and so because they're handled differently, and so what we're talking really here is big hurts, and that's when we get into the whole forgiveness conversation. Because how many people have you seen their children were just slaughtered in a car wreck or a gun thing, and then somebody comes and says, "Well, I forgive them for killing my children," which is absolute bullshit. And I've had plenty of people say, "Well, I've told everybody I forgive them, but I really didn't." Well, of course not. and
Yeah,
so
yeah, putting this in a practical context for listeners to understand that just in case people are thinking you're dismissive of this stuff, which I don't think is
no,
coming across at all, you actually have done a lot of work with men who are still trying to get over their early sexual abuses and things of their childhood. And so bringing them, utilizing this work, how does that frame in the context of working with people who have pretty good reason to feel as though they've been victimized or been damaged?
well, first of all, I was sexually abused by my father for 3 years, from 9 to 12, brutally. And I do mean brutally.
Yeah.
Uh, so I have a lot of empathy, but I also know that if you don't heal it, then it just gets worse and it becomes who you are, and there's no win in that. And so by working with them and helping them heal and getting to a point, but what I mean by healing is that means it's called taking back all of your power that you've given away to this person. Because when you stay in a victim place, you're giving away all of your power to them to make your life miserable, to make you livable, miserable. And they don't deserve that, first of all, that much power. You should take back your all of the power you give them to make you feel bad, to make you feel like a victim. You have to work through all of that and say, I was victimized, and I can say this, I was victimized by my father, and I hated him for years until I finally took back all of my power and say, no, that's on you. It's your job to come to me and apologize to me for what you did and make amends. It's not my job to forgive you and let you off the hook and give you absolution for something that should never be given absolution for. So I don't ever believe in that, because I think it's bad karma. You're robbing them of the opportunity to heal their karma, and it's not helping you at all. So by taking back your power and not giving them anything, if you see them, there's just nothing there, because you're completely collected all of you back.
How do we describe that in the context of boundaries? Just what's the using that context that you've done?
Well, again, we're back to the energetic boundary. So if every time I see you and I go back to the wound and then I let you in there to re-wound me over and over and over again, I just completely surrendered. I'm the dog that rolls over and puts his belly in the air and says, in the top, and says, like, you can kill me now.
Yeah. So the boundary, there's actually no boundaries.
Exactly right.
There's
You've
no
just merged.
energy in your boundary. Mm.
I'm completely about keeping that energetic boundary there all the time with everybody, including your partner, because relationship is about joining. It's not about merging.
Yeah. And you've said that so effectively so many times, but that's just really powerfully again the joining and the merging, and I know with my partner we were just talking about it 20 minutes ago or half an hour ago, um, how women give up their identity a lot, and in fact what we've got is a secondary thing happening in the current generation is they're not giving up anything, or they're not joining. So one was
Yes.
too much merging, and now we've got the
Opposite
pendulum
ends of the
swing.
spectrum. Yes.
Mm. So there's a constant need to review and recollect and reframe, and this is exactly what this program of yours is obviously going to do, because it allows you to go through the steps. And even that beautiful, I mean, although I know you're saying it's more technical, that second step, the 15 boundaries, it's a fabulous way where you can get a grip of stuff because those 15 boundaries or those 15 issues to boundaries coming at you in one go, it's like a wrecking ball. But you break them up and you go, oh, it's just a bunch of little things.
Yeah, like the simple one in there is like different cultures have different ways of saying hello and greeting.
Wow.
And so that's a cultural boundary.
Yeah, and you can see it broadly with languages, but it's within different cultures in within cultures, the subcultures and it's exactly right. I mean, I can imagine you see someone get up in America, they get up and they say, hello, mum, hello, dad, g'day, brother. Well, Australia, g'day, brother, and I say, gee, what the hell are you doing? I mean, you can see these changes depending upon the environment. Context is important. And I see that as being terribly just coming up in my mind. This, well, there it is, being sensitive to the context and the state of the other person is an important
Oh,
part of your context.
absolutely. Always.
Yeah.
And most people don't have any clue what boundaries are. And once you really understand these energetic boundaries and how they work, example is that women often get really unhappy when guys are catcalling them. So so what happens is that the guy catcalls them, and all of a sudden he gets all of her attention. Guess what he wanted? All of her attention. He didn't care that it was good attention or bad attention. He simply wanted all of her attention. By pulling her energy away from him completely, there's nothing for him to connect to, and he just goes away.
So he wanted to disempower her or take her power away or dissolve her boundary.
Yeah, right. He just wanted, yeah, he wanted all of her onto him, and he got it.
Uh, yeah.
So and so so I teach him energetically how to put the boundary, and there's nothing for him to connect to. There's an example I used in the workshop. I lived in Carpinteria, California for a number of years, and I walked the beach every day, and I always wear a hat. Well, I look as good as I do at my age.
Well done.
and one day I was walking back, and this homeless guy took offense to my hat that I was wearing because I was wearing a cowboy hat that I had bought in Australia, I think. I don't remember where I bought it, but no, I bought it in Mexico. And he started following me and yelling at me. And so I started doing these techniques that I would teach somebody, and he just stopped like that because there was nothing for him to connect to. I just completely disconnected from my energy. And so he stopped following me.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a word in there that just jumped out at me because it's something we sort of accuse Americans of it a lot, but I think it's fairly broad as I travel around the world. Uh, but Americans do seem to do it quite well, and it's this thing of taking offense. You are offending me. In the context of what we're talking about here, boundaries and joining and repelling, what's a discussion? What's something you can explain to us about that tendency to take offense?
Well, most of us are pretty fragile.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, we're easily pricked. And so there's a way to say that I think your behavior is inappropriate. And there's another way of saying that you've offended me and I'm deeply emotionally wounded and making it all about you. See, I'm making it about them.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Because if you make it about you, you've just lost your boundary and it's kind of all over. If you make it about them, if somebody's bullying you, you say, like, why would, what does it say about you that you would say something like that to me?
Yeah.
This is about you. This isn't about me. So you put it back on them and give it back to them.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of ties in a bit with some of the work I'm doing in what I call the curiosity. It's sort of like, wow, what are you doing? I know you're saying terrible things to me. That's really interesting, but wow, why would you do that? Where is that coming from? Well, to sit down, let me have a chat. I'll see.
You have a choice as to whether you're going to take on what they said about you and wear it as a your clothing, or you're going to say, sorry, that's not mine. But bullies are really good at reading people and finding that soft spot and poking it.
Yeah,
But the truth is that they're just as insecure as anybody else. And so if you turn the spotlight back on them, it's going to end things pretty quickly.
Yeah, more often than not, that's right. Bullies are themselves out for gold. I mean, certainly you get your psychopaths, but that's another story, who just
Right.
like pain and discomfort. But most of them have their own story, and buying into it. I know. I just thinking. My wife sometimes says, and she's getting over it because she had brought up very much as a submissive, do what you're
Mhm.
told, are you a good girl sort of stuff. And she would said the other day, she said, "Oh, one of my clients told me off." And I said, no, you got told off. The client just said a bunch of stuff that they didn't like. That's their problem. And she said, oh, yeah, that's right. What am I doing? Why am I letting them? And really, we could have just used the words you used, take my power, take my,
Yeah. Give
take
your
my
power
occasion.
away. Time. Just there, have it. I don't need it anymore. You can have it. Just slaughter me now.
But there are other things in your life which I suppose talk about empowerment. I suppose talk about uh, difficulty of difficulties in being usual and normal, apparent. And it was a stuff you talk about now quite openly. And I get the word. I got to read the word. Gynecomastia.
Yeah,
And
gynecomastia.
gynecomastia, and it's an issue that you had to deal with, and there are a number of ways that you dealt with, and I wonder if you could explain to people what it is for a start,
Sure.
how you
This was not
managed it, but then what was the context of the way that helped you understand boundaries and power and so on and so forth.
well, it was my fifth book,
Right.
Demystifying Gynecomastia. Yes, I was a classic adolescent onset of gynecomastia. There's adult onset and there's adolescent onset. It's tied to hormones, actually.
Yeah.
And so the simple answer is that it's an imbalance of it's an over testosterone in the body gets converted to estrogen if there's too much of it. And so if you have an overbalance of testosterone and your body isn't capable of neutralizing that, then it gets converted to estrogen. And so then you can develop secondary female characteristics. This is why alcoholics often have, because they're trashing their body, and so it's an older age, there can be an increase in estrogen in the body, and then you can develop secondary characteristic. But it's a surge of adolescence. You get all this testosterone flowing through the body, and the liver is not up to handling it. So it's a liver dysfunction that does this. And so I developed, and I was a skinny little kid with breasts.
All
And of
right.
course,
So
that
the breast tissue, of course, that'd be one. I was just imagining facial hair might change, sort of
that
various other
doesn't
things they talk about.
stop that. But it just you gets triggered enough that once you develop breast tissue, it's there until you cut it out.
Right.
It doesn't. It's not a matter of losing weight
Yeah.
because it's just so it really has to be. So anyway, so I got the girls offered their bras, and somehow I always managed up on the skins team on basketball. And guys would pinch my chest. So just all the usual stupid stuff the kids do. But it made me hyper conscious of that. And so my real clarity about boundaries didn't come until later, much later, but I have I guess growing up in a cult, which I did with really kind of horrendous abuse, there was a certain way that we were taught to be in the world that didn't matter how people saw us. And so I always sort of had that veneer.
Yeah.
As the Channel 4 or no, Channel 4 and the BBC came over and did documentaries on gynecomastia. And when they were in the middle of the taping, one of them, and they stopped the taping, they said, all these guys we're talking to are devastated because they had breasts, but here you're sitting here and talking about it like it's no big issue. And I said, well, the truth is that in my lifetime or my childhood, breasts weren't even in the top five the problems in my childhood. So it's all a matter of perspective too. I mean, I had other much bigger issues that were going on that needed much more of my attention than the fact that I was growing breasts. And then when I had the opportunity, I got the first surgery, and then it comes back in 30% of cases and came back again. So I had the second surgery. And so and that was actually on an Australian TV show. They came and filmed my second surgery.
Wow. I mean, there's a couple of things here which are really interesting, and I think boundaries. We're talking about what's going on in there, but I'm just hearing the word in my head of bravery. Um, and courage. And my favorite, and I use that word because the way I define it comes from a book I read in high school. It's the only thing I got from the book, The Red Badge of Courage, is some Civil War story.
Yeah.
But it said, courage is a sublime lack of self-concern.
Yes.
And you were able to, and now your particular one is because, compared to, contextually, it was able to do that. But I think regardless of that, there's a certain amount of temperament in you that you were able to foster and develop. So I'm guessing that that's another thing that gets developed and is allowed to emerge more when people go through this work, through these 7 steps in the program. This sort of thing like, I'm not at risk. I put myself at risk because I'm less damageable. Yeah, nodding
Yes.
of the head. Thank you.
The whole program's about taking back your power.
Yeah.
It really is, and about holding that power in a real way that makes your life so much easier. So, because we give our power away all the time. Somebody honks at you and you're ready to go kill them. Or, I mean, really stupid stuff all the time where they say something about what you're wearing or what you said. And it's like, okay, so that's your opinion. Have a nice day. So, and but we're so sensitive because we've never taught boundaries, but also it's because in our families what people think of we're trained to believe that what people think of us is more important than what we think of ourselves.
Mm.
And so we're taught to give away that power in our families, and if that's what love means to you, that's a default setting.
Yeah, that's really important. It's so important to understand. And I'm just thinking we're sort of bordering on another very interesting issue of being comfortable in the way you in the body that you're in or in the representation that and I suppose we get that smaller group of people who actually find that they're in the wrong body. So this sort of working, it's the importance is not about the surgeries or the this or the that. It's about having the power, having the sense of powerfulness in your boundaries that enable you to connect and engage. That's a message that I think is that's my sort of little takeaway from that, and I'm hoping that resonates with what you're doing.
It does. Like I mentioned self-love, and that's one of the things that I take issue with because people use it as armor.
Right.
They're saving themselves or they're armoring themselves with self-love so they can't be hurt by this. And I think it's a miss. I think it's the wrong use. I think love is something you give and something you get back. And I think that what we're really talking about is self-acceptance, which is what you're talking about. I
Yeah.
accepted the fact I had breast. At that point, I could either do something about it or not. Plenty of guys like their breast, and their wives like playing with their breast.
Cool. So, and it's about decisions, just decisions. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, so is this okay? But it's back to the same concept of 12 steps. You have to admit that you are what you are, then you can decide what you want to do about it or not do about it. But the first step is admitting that you have a problem or that this is what's going on. And so it's being gay, it's having breast, it's doing bisexual, being transgender. You have to first accept who you are, and then you decide what steps are you going to do or not going to do about it.
And
That's
also,
really that power.
yeah, and also some of the things you're talking about. I mean, the self-love. I mean, I'm listening to that in the context of that self-love is done as a sort of a reverse action to combat shame. But the deal is that's not what's going to get rid of shame. If you get rid of shame, then it's not sort of so much that you self-love, but you don't not love. It's a funny thing. We keep trying to add stuff rather than going back to the fundamental states that we can have.
Well, and shame is giving away your power too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely no better description than the sense that I am not of worth or of value,
Not good.
not
Yeah.
good enough. Those those sorts of things, and that happens because you give away the power. And I talk about the winner loser world, the outside world that says whether you're a winner or a loser. And people say, how do I fix that? And I say, well, just tell it to piss off. And it's a lot more complex than that, but fundamentally, through different type of techniques, and you know, establishing powerful boundaries is a beautiful way in which you can tell the external world and its rules and regulations and criticisms and demands to an Australian vernacular piss off.
Yes, I was going to say fuck off, but yes.
Yes, we may have to take that out, as clearly this is played to kiddies. But Mel, we've gone through a lot of territory here, um, and I'm looking at what might now be an appropriate time just to sort of bring this together into a coherent sort of cogent comment, a bit of a not so much a summary, but if now you're in this point of going, well, hey, Richard says to me, okay, what's the message? What's the fundamental framework, or what's the key thing I want to say to people that are listening?
A lot of what you've been taught about who you are and how to be in the world is wrong. It's fundamentally misguided. It was all done out of love because they're simply teaching you what they were taught. But most people aren't really well educated around this, including, frankly, a lot of therapists. So some of them are the worst at this, I might add. Uh, and so I'm a rule breaker. I'm about changing the conversation, changing the ground so that people can live their lives fully and a whole lot easier. And so we make it so hard, and it doesn't have to be hard when we really learn the fundamentals of how this all works. And we're frankly just given a lot of bad information.
I mean, what the way I sort of framed it in my head was, okay, your parents, they're doing their best. I did the best when my kids were young, but it's a starting point.
Yes.
Yes, it's not an end point.
So if I could tell two short stories, would that be
Oh,
okay?
please do.
There's a woman who took my workshop early on when I was doing the in-person one, the full day. It was a glory. It was a change workshop. This whole thing is a change. It'll change how you see yourself. It will change how you experience yourself in the world. But she took the workshop. This was the full day in-person one I did before COVID. And so she went to work the next week and she was seeing 9 clients a day, which I used to do all the time too. When you can do that when you have these boundaries and you're not getting sucked dry by the whole thing. And at the end of the day, she called her husband and said, "Hi, I'm on my way home." He said, "Should I have your cocktail ready?" And she says, "No, I'm fine. I'll see you when I get back." And she gets home. She walks in. He says, "You sure you don't need the cocktail?" She says, "No, I'll just freshen up, make dinner." He looked at her and said, "Merle." She said, "Yes." Because it's so fun. She could be with 9 people a day and be fully alive and have the energy for her family instead of giving it all away at the office in a way that wasn't useful to her clients, frankly. So that's the power of this. And so it changes. And I originally was only teaching therapists because they need this worse than anybody.
Yeah.
But I've accepted it because so many professions, any helping profession, doctors, nurses, paramedics, policemen, all could use these better boundaries. Okay, so the other story, I was been thinking about this a lot. So my 7th book will be my memoir. So that's that's quite a story. So I'm looking forward to telling that. But one of my most poignant memories of my mother, and she's crazy as a loon. I mean, I grew up in a cult where we were told from my earliest awareness that she was ruler of the world, the universe, sitting on the right hand of God. and we got daily missives from God, and we weren't allowed to tell anybody who we were, we'd be killed. It was like the whole thing. We were completely isolated from the world.
Mm.
Yes, it's fun. But there's something that she did very early on. I don't we were it was Easter. I couldn't have been more than about 5 years old at most. We were at the city Easter egg hunt, and they shot the gun off, and the kids went running, and I was going with the other kids. She said, "Go where they're not going." She says, "Don't follow them. Go the other direction." And somehow I took that in really, really deeply. And it's really been a framing principle of my whole life, is not to follow the crowd, but to find out what they're missing by going that way. What's over there?
Yeah.
And that's how I became me.
Yes. The crowd is well versed in what is available, and unversed. Uh, yes, I often, I was just, again, a few days ago, I was saying, we're talking about the road less traveled. And I said, maybe it's just the road more interesting. Um, and and because of that, Mel, that's such a great note to just wind things up as a takeaway to everyone, just to consider. Sometimes maybe it's okay and a good idea to go with the crowd, but remember, it's your choice, your boundaries, your power, your capabilities. And I just thank you so much for sharing all this wonderful stuff with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And it's great to hear your accent. That makes me feel at home. And you get to hear
Good.
my accent. So that's wonderful. And
Yeah. Well, I look forward to having much more contact, and maybe even talking a little bit further down the track when there's some other things going on. But
love to.
for now, we'll say goodbye and thank you very much, Mel Yost.
Thank you very, very much. It's been a delight anytime.